It was one of those small towns where everyone knew each other by name. The streets were quiet, lined with trees that turned golden during autumn, and life moved at its own calm pace. In that peaceful town lived a man named David with his wife Lena, their twin daughters Clara and Chloe, and their little boy Ethan. To everyone who knew them, they seemed like the kind of family you read about in happy stories, the ones filled with laughter, love, and warmth. David was a hard-working man who owned a small auto repair shop on the edge of town. He had built it from scratch years ago, working long hours under the sun, fixing engines and helping neighbors who couldn't afford expensive repairs. Despite his rough hands and tired eyes, he always came home with a smile. His family was his whole world. He never missed a single school play, dance recital, or parent meeting, no matter how busy his day had been. Lena was the heart of the home. She worked part-time at the local library and spent most of her days looking after the kids. She had a calm, gentle way of speaking, the kind that could make anyone feel safe. The twins adored her, but their world mostly revolved around their father. They followed him everywhere, often sitting by his workshop after school, helping him clean tools or handing him screws while chatting about everything that happened in their day. Clara and Chloe were identical in every way, the same brown hair, the same dimple when they smiled, and the same soft laugh that filled the house with joy. Even their teachers sometimes struggled to tell them apart, but those who knew them well could always notice the small differences. Clara was more curious, always asking questions, while Chloe was a little quieter, more thoughtful. Still, they were inseparable. Wherever one went, the other was right beside her. Ethan, the youngest, was only 6. He idolized his sisters and wanted to do everything they did. The girls often dressed him up in funny costumes or made him sit through their little shows in the living room. David would sit in his armchair pretending to be a strict audience while Lena laughed softly from the kitchen. Their home was full of life. Weekends were for family movie nights, pancakes in the morning, and long evening walks. To their friends and neighbors, they were the definition of happiness. But no one knew that behind the laughter, David had been hiding something even he didn't fully understand. It started a few months before that tragic day. David had begun to feel strange spells of dizziness and shortness of breath. Sometimes, while working on a car, his vision would blur for a moment. He would sit down, take a deep breath, and tell himself it was just fatigue. He didn't want Lena to worry. "I'm fine," he would say whenever she noticed he looked pale. "Just tired, that's all." She believed him because David never complained and he always looked strong, like nothing could bring him down. The twins, however, noticed small things too. Some evenings, he would rest his hand on his chest for a moment or take deep breaths after climbing the stairs. Clara once asked him if he was okay, and he smiled, ruffling her hair. "Just getting old, kiddo," he said with a chuckle. They laughed, not knowing how heavy those words would sound later. That Friday evening, before everything changed, the family had dinner together like always. Lena had made David's favorite, roasted chicken with mashed potatoes. The table was filled with the usual chatter, the twins talking about a school art project, Ethan bragging about how he scored a goal during recess, and David teasing Lena about how she still couldn't remember where she kept the car keys. It was a warm, happy evening, the kind that felt ordinary but later becomes unforgettable. After dinner, the twins went to their room to finish some drawings they had started for their art class. Lena cleaned up the kitchen while David sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the quiet street outside. The sky was cloudy and there was a light breeze. He seemed lost in thought. When Lena joined him, he smiled faintly and said, "You know, I've been thinking, if something ever happens to me, I want you to promise me one thing." Lena frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Nothing's going to happen." "I'm serious," he said softly, still looking out into the distance. "Promise me you'll take care of them. Of all of them." She placed her hand on his. "Of course I will. But you're scaring me." "Why are you saying this?" He smiled, that same calm smile she had always loved. "Just a thought, that's all." Then he looked at her and his eyes seemed a little distant, almost sad. "You and the kids, you're my whole life." That night Lena couldn't sleep. His words kept echoing in her mind, but she told herself it was just one of those strange moods people get sometimes. David had been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe he was just tired. She didn't want to overthink it. Meanwhile, the twins stayed up late talking, as they always did. Their room was filled with soft giggles, the sound of pencils scratching paper, and the whisper of secrets shared between sisters. They talked about what they wanted to do when they grew up. One wanted to be an artist, the other a teacher. They promised each other that no matter what happened in life, they would always stay together. It was past midnight when the house finally went quiet. The rain started soon after, tapping gently on the windows. David turned off the lights and checked on each of his children before going to bed. He stopped by the twins' room and smiled at how peacefully they slept, holding each other's hands even in their dreams. He whispered something softly, words Lena would never know, then closed the door quietly. The next morning, the sound of rain was still falling when Lena woke up. She looked at the clock. It was later than usual. David was usually up by now, already making coffee or reading the newspaper. She went downstairs expecting to find him in the kitchen, but the lights were still off. She frowned and called his name. No answer. Thinking he might still be asleep, she decided to wake the twins first. Their school had an art presentation that day, and they were excited about it the night before. She walked to their room, half smiling at the thought of them probably still wrapped in their blankets. But as soon as she pushed the door open, something inside her froze. The curtains were half drawn, and the soft gray light from the rainy sky filled the room. The twins were lying side by side on their beds just like every morning, except this time they weren't moving. For a moment, Lena thought they were pretending. They loved playing pranks, especially on weekends. She called out their names, laughing nervously. "Come on, girls, wake up!" "Don't start this again." But they didn't move. Not even a twitch. Her laughter faded. Panic started to creep in. She rushed to them, shaking their shoulders, calling their names louder this time. Their skin felt cold, too cold. Her voice cracked as she screamed for David, her hands trembling uncontrollably. When he didn't answer, she ran to the master bedroom. And that's when her world shattered completely. David was on the floor beside the bed, motionless. The cup of water he must have kept on the nightstand had spilled. His eyes were closed and his face looked calm, almost peaceful, like he had just fallen asleep. But Lena knew. Deep down, she knew. She collapsed beside him, crying his name, shaking him, begging him to wake up. Her screams echoed through the house until a neighbor, hearing the commotion, rushed over and called for help. Within minutes, the house was filled with sirens, flashing lights, and people moving quickly, paramedics, police officers, neighbors standing in shock at the door. But no one could do anything. 3 lives were gone, the father and his twin daughters, all within the same morning. The little boy, Ethan, stood by the doorway, clutching his toy car, not understanding why everyone was crying. By noon, the whole neighborhood knew. People whispered in disbelief, hugging their children a little tighter that day. No one could understand how something like this could happen. The family that once filled the street with laughter was now silent, their home covered in sorrow. That night, as rain continued to fall, Lena sat alone in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the empty couch where David used to sit. The twins' drawings were still scattered on the table, their pencils left exactly where they'd placed them. Everything felt frozen, like time had stopped. She kept replaying that last conversation with David in her head, his strange words, his distant smile. And for the first time she realized, maybe he knew something none of them did. Maybe somehow he felt it coming. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the dark sky. Inside, Lena whispered to herself, "You promised to stay with us." But deep down, she could almost hear his voice, calm and gentle, saying, "I never left." The morning after that terrible day, the house felt like a place frozen in time. It was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful. It was the kind that felt heavy, where even the sound of breathing seemed too loud. The neighbors had gathered outside, whispering, not knowing what to say or how to comfort Lena. Inside, she sat on the living room floor, her hands shaking, her mind struggling to make sense of what had happened. The rain had finally stopped, but the air still smelled of it. There were footprints all over the hallway from the paramedics and police officers who had come and gone. The blankets were still on the couch. The breakfast she had started that morning still sitting untouched on the counter. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt real anymore. Her little boy, Ethan, sat silently beside her, holding his stuffed bear close. He didn't cry much. He just looked confused, like his young mind couldn't understand why everyone kept saying, "They're gone." He asked her once softly, "Mama, when are they coming back?" And those words broke her heart into 1,000 pieces. Lena couldn't answer. How could she explain something she didn't understand herself? Just yesterday they were laughing at the dinner table. Just yesterday David was teasing her about her cooking. Just yesterday the twins were drawing and talking about their art project. And now within a few hours everything had been taken away from her. The police had finished their initial inspection. They asked questions gently, about the gas system, about what the family had eaten, about any medical conditions. They tried to find something, anything that could explain what had happened, but nothing made sense. There were no signs of struggle, no signs of harm, no evidence of carbon monoxide or gas leaks. It was as if their hearts had simply stopped on their own all at once. The local doctor, who had known the family for years, looked just as confused. "We'll need to do a full examination," he told Lena softly. "We have to find out what caused this." She nodded numbly, barely hearing his words. All she could think about was the faces of her husband and her daughters. How peaceful they had looked, almost like they were sleeping. She couldn't shake that image from her mind. By evening, the news had spread across the town. People stopped by to offer food, prayers, or just sit with her in silence. Some hugged her and cried, others didn't know what to say. Everyone was kind, but their sympathy only made the loss feel more real. That night, when the house finally emptied, Lena sat alone in the twins' room. Their beds were still made, their clothes neatly folded, and their school bags still hung by the door. On the wall above their desks were their drawings, colorful, happy pictures of family, sunshine, and flowers. One of the drawings caught her eye. It was a picture of the 5 of them, holding hands, smiling under a bright sky. In the corner, Clara had written, "Together forever." Lena pressed her hand against the paper and closed her eyes. "You kept your promise," she whispered tearfully. "You really did stay together." The next few days passed in a blur. Between police visits, hospital reports, and the endless condolences, she barely slept. Every morning she woke up hoping it had all been a bad dream. But the silence of the house reminded her it was real. One afternoon, the officer in charge of the case, a kind man named Daniel, came by again. He spoke in a gentle voice, as if afraid his words might shatter her. "The autopsy reports should be ready soon," he said. "Right now, there's nothing unusual. It might take some time," Lena just nodded. Do you think they were in pain?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "No," he said finally. "From what we saw, they went peacefully. There were no signs of struggle or suffering." Those words brought her a small comfort, just enough to keep her from falling apart completely. But there was still that question in her mind, why? Why on the same day? Why together? That evening she sat with Ethan on the couch. He was quiet, playing with his toy cars, occasionally looking up at her. "Mama," he said suddenly, "I saw Daddy last night." Her heart stopped. She turned to him, trying not to alarm him. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He looked innocent, his little voice calm. "He was in my room," he said, not to be scared. "He said he's watching us." Lena felt a lump in her throat. She didn't know what to say. Maybe it was just a dream, she told herself. Ethan was young. His mind probably created something to make sense of what had happened. Still, a part of her wanted to believe it was real. Later that night, after putting him to bed, she went into her own room. The bedsheets were still crumpled from that morning. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the spot where David used to sleep. She picked up his pillow, held it tightly, and for a moment, she could almost smell his scent. Oil, soap, and the faint hint of cologne he always wore. Tears streamed down her face as memories flooded back. The laughter, the teasing, the quiet talks before bed. And then she remembered his words from that last night, when he had asked her to take care of the kids. She finally understood what he meant, but it was too late. The next day, the doctor called. He told her that the tests were still being reviewed, but so far they couldn't find any poison or toxins. Everything looked normal. "We'll have to wait for more results," he said gently. Sometimes these things take time, but the idea of waiting made her restless. She needed answers now. She needed to understand what had happened, not just for her peace, but for Ethan's. She didn't want him to grow up with questions that would haunt him forever. As the days passed, people began talking. Small-town gossip spread fast. Some said it was a curse, others whispered that maybe the family had been haunted. Lena hated hearing those things. It wasn't evil, she thought. It couldn't be. It had to be something human, something she could explain. But at night, when she was alone, even she felt strange things. Sometimes she thought she heard the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway, or the soft laughter of the twins echoing from their room. Once she even felt a gentle touch on her shoulder, like someone standing behind her. She turned, but no one was there. She didn't tell anyone about it. She didn't want people to think she was losing her mind. Maybe it was her imagination, or maybe it was her heart trying to hold on to what was gone. A week after the tragedy, she finally received the call she had been waiting for. The doctor wanted to meet her in person. His tone was serious but not alarming. "We found something," he said. That night, Lena could barely sleep. She kept wondering what he meant. Had they found a disease? Was it something in the house? Was it something genetic? Her thoughts spun in circles. The next morning, she dropped Ethan off at her friend's house and went to the hospital. The corridors felt long and cold, and every step made her heart beat faster. When she finally entered the doctor's office, he greeted her kindly and asked her to sit down. "I know this has been very hard for you," he said softly, "but I think we may have an explanation." Lena held her breath, afraid of what she was about to hear. The doctor continued, "Your husband had a very rare heart condition. It's something that's often hard to detect. It can cause sudden cardiac arrest without warning. We didn't know because he didn't have any visible symptoms, but his heart showed signs of it during the examination." Lena blinked, trying to process his words. A heart condition? But he never said anything. He was fine. "That's the thing," the doctor said. "People with this condition can seem perfectly healthy until it suddenly happens. What's even more unusual is that both your daughters had the same genetic trait. It's rare but possible. They might not have shown any signs either." Lena sat frozen. She didn't know whether to cry or feel relieved. "So they died from the same thing?" He nodded slowly. "That's what it looks like. It might have been triggered by stress or shock, or maybe even happened at the same time naturally. It's rare, but it can happen." She sat there quietly, her hands trembling. For the first time in days, she felt a strange kind of peace. It didn't make the pain go away, but it gave her something to hold on to. An answer. When she left the hospital, the sky was gray again, but the air felt lighter. She stood in the parking lot, looking up at the clouds, whispering softly, "Now I know." That night she went home and told Ethan that his father and sisters had gone to heaven together, and that they were watching over him. He smiled as if he already knew. Then he said something that sent shivers down her spine. Daddy said he took them so they wouldn't be scared. Lena's eyes filled with tears. She hugged him tightly, unable to speak. Maybe it was just a child's way of understanding. Or maybe somehow there was truth in his words. Either way, she finally felt ready to say goodbye. Even though her heart would never truly let them go, days turned into weeks. Yet the house still felt like it was standing in a different world, one that time had forgotten to touch. The laughter that once filled every corner was gone. The small marks on the kitchen wall where the twins had measured their height every birthday were still there, as if waiting for another line to be drawn. The smell of motor oil still lingered faintly in the air, a quiet reminder of David's workshop. Everything felt familiar but empty, like a picture missing its people. After the doctor's explanation about the rare heart condition, Lena thought the mystery was over. She told herself that maybe this was just fate, something written long before she could change it. But not everyone in town believed that. Rumors had started spreading again, quietly but constantly. People who didn't understand the science behind it came up with their own versions. Some whispered that the house was cursed. Others said maybe something unnatural had happened. Lena tried to ignore it, but gossip in a small town always finds a way to reach your door. One afternoon, while she was out buying groceries, an older woman she barely knew stopped her. "You're very brave," the woman said softly. "After what happened, I don't think I could live in that house again." Lena forced a smile, thanked her, and walked away. But those words stayed with her all day. When she got home, she stood by the front door for a long time before stepping inside. It was her home, full of memories. But now it felt like the walls carried too many ghosts. Officer Daniel, the same kind man who had helped her from the beginning, continued to visit occasionally. Even after the case was officially closed, he came by to check on her and Ethan. He always said it was part of his duty, but she knew it was kindness. One day, as they sat at the dining table, he looked at her and said, "You know, Some people think once a file is closed, the questions stop. But I know for families like yours, they never really do. She nodded. It's strange, she said quietly. I finally know what happened, but I still can't stop thinking about that morning. I keep asking myself if I could have done something. Maybe if I had woken up earlier. He shook his head gently. You can't think that way. None of this was your fault. Sometimes, no matter how much we love someone, we can't stop what's meant to happen. She looked at him with tired eyes. But how can it be meant to happen? How can something so cruel be written for anyone? He didn't answer right away. I don't know, he admitted. But I do know this, when the way they went peacefully together says something. Maybe there's something beyond what we can explain. After he left, Lena sat in silence, his words replaying in her mind. Maybe there was something beyond. Maybe that's why David's hand had fallen beside one of the twins when they were found, almost like he was reaching out to protect her one last time. She didn't know if it was coincidence or something more, but it brought her a small comfort. A few days later, the doctor called her again. He had been reviewing the full reports from the lab. There's one more thing I wanted to share, he said. It's not exactly new information, but it confirms what we thought. The condition your husband had was genetic, passed directly to both twins. What's extraordinary is how their episodes were triggered almost at the same moment. Lena frowned. You mean it happened at the same time? Yes, he replied softly. Based on the estimated time of death, they were within minutes of each other. She went quiet. It felt strange, haunting, but also somehow beautiful, that they had left this world together. She hung up the call and sat by the window looking at the sky. The clouds were breaking apart and soft sunlight was spilling across the town. For the first time in weeks, she let herself smile faintly. Maybe, just maybe, they had found peace together. That night, she went through old photo albums. There were pictures of birthdays, beach trips, Christmas mornings. Every photo seemed to carry a small story. She stopped at one where David was holding both twins on his shoulders laughing, with Ethan standing beside them holding a balloon. It had been taken during a fair last year. She remembered that day clearly. The smell of popcorn, the sound of music, the way David had insisted on winning the biggest teddy bear for the girls. She traced her fingers over their faces in the photo. You were so happy, she whispered. Maybe that's how I should remember you, smiling. But the peace she felt that night didn't last long. The next morning, she got an unexpected visit. A man from the local newspaper had come to ask if she would agree to an interview. He wanted to write about the mystery of what had happened. Lena refused immediately. This isn't a story, she said firmly. It's my life. He apologized and left, but it reminded her that people were still talking, still trying to turn her tragedy into something for others to speculate about. That night, she decided she needed to leave the house for a few days, and not forever, just long enough to breathe again. She packed a small bag for herself and Ethan and drove to her sister's place in the next town. It was quiet there, surrounded by fields and trees, and for the first time in a long while she could sleep without waking up in tears. Her sister was gentle with her, never asking too many questions. She simply kept her company, cooked for her, and made sure Ethan had space to play. One evening, as the two women sat outside watching the sunset, her sister asked softly, "Do you ever feel them? Like they're still around?" Lena hesitated. "Sometimes," she admitted. "There are moments when I feel something. Not scary, just comforting. Like someone's watching over me." Her sister nodded. "Maybe they are." When Lena and Ethan returned home a few days later, the air inside the house felt different. It wasn't as heavy as before. She cleaned, opened the windows, and put fresh flowers on the table. She wanted to make the place feel alive again. Not to forget, but to keep their memory in a gentle way. One afternoon, as she was cleaning David's workshop, she found something she hadn't seen before. A small notebook tucked inside an old toolbox. She opened it, expecting to see car repair notes, but instead it was filled with short journal entries. They were written in David's handwriting. Most of them were simple. Reminders, little thoughts about family, small dreams he had. But one entry stood out. It was dated just 2 weeks before the tragedy. It said, "I've been feeling strange lately. Something doesn't feel right inside me, but I don't want to worry them. I'll be fine. I have to be. I just hope if anything ever happens, they'll be okay. I can't imagine leaving them alone." Her eyes filled with tears as she read it. It was clear now he had known something was wrong, but he had kept it to himself. Maybe he didn't realize how serious it was. Maybe he just wanted to protect them from worry. But somehow his heart had known. She closed the notebook gently and placed it on the shelf. That night she lit 3 candles, one for David, one for each of the twins. She sat in the quiet room watching the flames flicker. Ethan came in sleepy-eyed and sat beside her. "Why are you lighting candles, Mama?" he asked. "For Daddy and the girls," she said softly. "It helps me feel close to them." He nodded and watched quietly. After a moment he said, "They're not gone." Daddy said they're happy now. She looked at him, surprised. "When did he tell you that?" "In my dream," Ethan said. He was smiling. He said not to cry because they were all together. Lena hugged him tightly. Maybe it was just a dream, or maybe children could sense things adults couldn't. Either way, it filled her heart with a small warmth she hadn't felt in weeks. From that day on, things started to change little by little. She joined a local support group for parents who had lost loved ones. She met others who had been through pain like hers, people who understood the silence, the guilt, and the emptiness. Talking to them helped her breathe again. The police officially closed the case and the town eventually stopped whispering. People moved on, though Lena knew she never truly would. But she found strength in small things. Ethan's laughter, the smell of fresh rain, the memories that now felt like gentle reminders instead of open wounds. Every evening, she would walk by the small garden David had built behind the house. The twins used to plant flowers there every spring. That year, she planted new ones herself, daisies, their favorite. And as she watched them grow, she whispered, "You're still here, in every bloom." Though the world outside had returned to normal, Lena's heart carried a quiet understanding now that love, even in loss, never disappears. It simply changes shape, finding new ways to stay alive. And somewhere in that truth, she began to heal. Lena sat at the edge of her bed, the same spot where she had last seen David alive. The sunlight was faint that morning, as if the world itself didn't want to shine anymore. Her hands trembled as she held the phone, staring at the missed call from the hospital. For a moment, she didn't want to call back. Part of her feared the truth more than the mystery, because once she knew, there would be no turning back. She finally took a deep breath and dialed the number. The doctor's voice on the other end was calm, but she could sense something serious behind it. He asked her to come in that afternoon. There were some findings he wanted to discuss in person. Her heart started pounding again, just like it had on that terrible morning. When she reached the hospital, the same doctor who had done the autopsies greeted her. He was kind, with soft eyes that tried to prepare her for what he was about to say. He asked her to sit down. "Mrs. Lane," he began gently, "we've been going over every detail again and again, and I believe we've finally found something that could explain what happened." Lena felt her throat tighten. Her fingers twisted the edge of her sweater as she whispered, "Please, I just need to know why." "Why all 3? The doctor nodded slowly. "Your husband, David, had a very rare heart condition. It's called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It often doesn't show any symptoms until something triggers it. Sometimes it's extreme stress, physical exertion, or even emotional shock." Lena frowned. But David never mentioned anything about his heart. He was always active, strong, always working in the shop. "That's the difficult part," the doctor said. "This condition can stay hidden for years, and it's inherited, meaning your children have a 50% chance of carrying it as well." The words hit Lena like a wave. She stared at him, confused, almost refusing to believe. "You mean the twins?" He nodded solemnly. "Yes, we found similar signs in both girls' hearts. Their condition matched David's almost exactly." Lena covered her face, her shoulders shaking as silent tears fell. The doctor handed her a tissue but didn't speak for a moment, letting her breathe through it. She finally managed to whisper, "So they didn't suffer? It just happened?" He nodded again. "It would have been very fast. Their hearts likely stopped almost instantly." Lena's mind spun. She tried to remember every detail of that morning, every sound, every second. The silence, the stillness, David on the floor, and then the twins. Maybe when the girls saw him like that, the shock triggered their own attacks. The thought made her chest ache, but at least now she had some kind of answer. When she left the hospital, she stood in the parking lot for a long time, staring up at the cloudy sky. It wasn't lightning or poison or anything evil. It was something hidden inside them, something they never even knew was there, Somehow that gave her a small sense of peace. Not much, but enough to take one step forward. The following week, preparations for the funeral began. The whole town wanted to help. Neighbors brought food, offered rides, and helped with flowers. People who barely knew the family came to visit and share their sympathy. Lena, however, stayed mostly quiet. She was polite, but her mind was far away. Every small detail reminded her of the life she had lost. The smell of motor oil on David's old jacket. The sound of laughter that used to fill the house when the twins argued over music. Even Ethan's quiet humming in the corner sounded like an echo of the past. Ethan was only 8, too young to truly understand. He asked questions, but his voice was innocent, not broken like hers. "Mom, why can't Daddy and the girls come back? Can't the doctors fix them?" Lena would hold him close and say softly, "They're not in pain anymore, sweetheart. They're resting now." He'd nod slowly, as if trying to make sense of something far beyond his years. The funeral director came a few days later to finalize arrangements. He was a gentle older man who spoke softly, as if every word needed to be wrapped in care. He helped Lena choose the caskets, the flowers, and the music. She chose white lilies for the twins and deep red roses for David. The twins' coffins would be side by side, with their fathers between them, just like how they always sat together on the couch. It felt right, though the thought of seeing them like that made her heart twist. The night before the funeral, Lena sat in the twins' room for hours. Their beds were still made the way they had left them. Posters on the wall, hairbrushes on the dresser, notebooks half open on the study table. She picked up one of the notebooks and flipped through the pages. In it were sketches of bracelets, dresses, and dream vacation spots. On the last page, both girls had drawn something together. A heart with 3 names inside. Dad, Clara, Chloe. Lena pressed the page to her chest and cried softly. She didn't want to disturb Ethan, who had finally fallen asleep in her bed, but every sob came from a place that words couldn't reach. The next morning arrived too quickly. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, and a soft drizzle started just as the funeral procession began. The sound of rain hitting umbrellas filled the air, and people stood silently as the 3 caskets were carried into the church. Lena felt her knees weaken, but 2 friends held her arms gently, helping her walk inside. The sight before her took her breath away. 3 coffins perfectly aligned, surrounded by flowers and photographs. Pictures of birthdays, vacations, and smiles that would never return. As the service began, the pastor spoke softly about love, faith, and eternal connection. He said some bonds are so strong that even death cannot separate them. Those words lingered in the air. Lena listened, but her eyes never left the coffins. Every detail seemed to pull her deeper into the reality she didn't want to face. After the prayers, family and friends took turns sharing memories. One of the twins' teachers spoke about how inseparable the girls were, how they once turned in identical homework by accident and laughed about it for days. Another neighbor talked about David's kindness, how he never turned away anyone who needed help, even late at night. When it was Lena's turn, she stood up slowly. The room was silent. She could barely find her voice, but somehow words began to flow. "They were my whole world," she said softly. David was the kind of man who fixed everything. Cars, shelves, hearts. And the girls? They were light, pure light. They loved life so much that they made everyone else love it too. I can't explain why this happened. But maybe they were never meant to be apart. Maybe that's why they left together. Her voice broke at the last line, and a few people began to cry quietly. When the service ended, people started approaching the coffins to say goodbye. Some left flowers, others just touched the edges gently. Lena held Ethan's hand tightly as they walked closer. The twins looked peaceful, their faces soft and calm, almost like they were sleeping. Someone had placed their favorite bracelets on their wrists. David looked strong and gentle even in death. Lena felt a strange warmth in her chest. Not comfort exactly, but something close to acceptance. She realized they had all gone together, not one before another. Somehow that thought made the unbearable slightly lighter. As people began to leave the church, Lena stayed behind for a few moments. She whispered something only they could hear. "I'll take care of Ethan, I promise. You don't have to worry anymore." Then she stood there quietly, listening to the soft patter of rain on the church roof. It almost sounded like a heartbeat, faint, steady, alive. When she finally turned to leave, she looked back one last time. The three of them were side by side, just as they always had been. In that stillness, Lena felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave her the strength to keep moving. Because even though death had taken them, love hadn't gone anywhere. It was still there, wrapped around her in every memory, every heartbeat, every breath, and she knew deep down that somehow they were still together and watching over her. The morning of the burial was calm. The storm that had hovered over the town for days had finally cleared, leaving behind a sky washed clean and pale. The sun rose slowly, peeking through thin clouds as if even it knew this day needed to be gentle. Lena woke before dawn. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The house felt empty yet heavy with memories. The smell of David's cologne still lingered faintly in the hallway, and the twins' shoes sat neatly by the door, untouched. Every corner whispered their absence. Ethan came into the kitchen, rubbing his sleepy eyes. He climbed onto her lap and leaned his head against her shoulder without saying a word. For a moment, they just sat in silence, listening to the quiet. Then he looked up at her and asked softly, "Mom, will they be together today?" She nodded, brushing his hair back. "Yes, sweetheart. They'll rest together, just like always." That answer seemed to comfort him. He smiled faintly, then went to get dressed in the little black suit that their neighbor had bought for him. When the time came, the car from the funeral home arrived. As Lena stepped outside, the crisp morning air touched her face, cool and almost kind. The street was lined with neighbors who stood silently as the family made their way to the churchyard. No one spoke, but their eyes carried words that didn't need to be said: sympathy, sorrow, respect. The three caskets were already waiting near the gravesite. The twins' white ones shimmered faintly in the sunlight, while David's darker oak one stood between them. Flowers surrounded them, lilies, roses, and white carnations tied with soft ribbons. It was beautiful, but the beauty hurt. As people gathered, soft music began to play, one of the twins' favorite songs. Lena recognized it instantly. It was the one they used to sing along to in the car, their voices echoing through the seats while David laughed at how off-key they were. The melody filled the air now, slow and tender, and it made her chest tighten. The pastor spoke first. He talked about life, love, and loss, but his voice carried warmth rather than sadness. "We may not understand why such things happen," he said gently, "but we can be certain of one thing: love never ends. It may change its form, but it never leaves." Lena kept her eyes on the coffins. The sunlight danced across the polished surfaces, and for a fleeting second she imagined she saw movement. A flicker of reflection, like a hand brushing over wood. She blinked it away, thinking it was just her tears playing tricks. After the prayers, people began to come forward one by one to say goodbye. Some placed flowers, others whispered words only they could hear. The twins' classmates stood together, their faces pale and wet with tears. One girl placed 2 friendship bracelets on the edge of the coffins, identical ones the twins had made months earlier. As Lena approached with Ethan, the crowd parted quietly. She held his small hand as they stepped closer. David looked peaceful, his expression calm, his hands resting on his chest just as she remembered. The twins looked like angels in white. Their faces carried a faint, gentle smile, the kind that seemed too alive to belong to the still. Lena froze for a moment, unsure if her eyes were deceiving her. She looked closer, and yes, it was real. Both girls had the same soft expression, the same curve of the lips, as if they were sharing a quiet secret. A few people behind her noticed too. A whisper moved through the line. "They look like they're smiling," someone murmured.